So today is what we call the third Sunday of Easter. It's this season starting with Easter. That is the first Sunday of Easter. I mean, that sounds logical. And it goes until Pentecost. And the temptation at this time of year is to say, we know that Jesus has risen, and that is a good and a wonderful thing, and we're going to go out and tell all the world, excuse me, the truth that we know. That's a temptation that we have, and probably one we should avoid. There is a time for that, but now is a time of reflection and learning, because Jesus did something amazing with his death and his resurrection, but it doesn't mean that we are always going to understand it well immediately afterwards. So this is a time to take the space we need to understand just what it is that has happened. Last week we saw how even Luke goes to great lengths at the start of the book of Acts to give us time and space to understand what has taken place, because the events were so dramatic. And that's why I'm glad we're given space, especially at this time of year, to do just that. I don't know about y'all, but I've talked to a number of folks, and did Easter feel a little bit off this year? It did for me. I mean, there's obviously a lot of reasons for that. One is just simply that Easter was on March 31st this year. And I know there is not much difference between March 31st and April 1st, but in my head there's a big psychological difference between the months of March and the months of April, right? April is clearly spring, and March is clearly we don't know what. And so that was part of it. Another part of it was that this Easter season felt more busy than normal. And I know that it is normally a busy time of year, so I shouldn't be surprised by that, but it did. It felt a little bit busier than normal. But also this year, it was off for another reason, and that was the Tuesday before Palm Sunday was when I got that phone call that said, we're going to be moving this year. And then we had to keep quiet about it for 2 weeks and couldn't say anything to anybody because Easter was really early this year, and whenever that happens, it really kind of, everything that happens during our regular appointment season gets kind of confused, and things get delayed and put off because Easter is happening, and that's way more important than any of the appointments that are being made. And so it was a bit of a challenge. If you've ever been a part of having to sit on that kind of information for a while, you know what that feels like, right? You've got to keep something quiet for a bit, and it's hard. And I don't mention that to try and get any sort of sympathy, but it is to say that we all find times when we're struggling with the things that are going on, where it is interrupting other parts of our lives, and we need help to figure out how do we get through all of this. We know it's human nature that we don't often process big things quickly, especially things that are earth-shattering or life-shattering or even just life-interrupting. And we don't process those things fast. We may, in the moment, just to get through the moment, we may be able to go, oh, okay, I kind of get this, and I can get through the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes or day. But at some point, we need that time and space to kind of process what it is that has just happened. Because for as much as the human brain can process, and as much and as fast as it can be, which is incredible, the trouble is that we still need time, precisely because we can process so much at one time when we can't process it quickly. We have developed things that say, oh, something big happens, great, I need all of the information in order to do that, and that is going to take time. Because all of the information for us is overwhelming, even though we can handle so much. To think of this differently, this is an age-old problem that we have in lots of different places. To understand kind of how this backup happens, we were told back in the day that all of our major cities needed highways and superhighways to manage all of the traffic congestion that was beginning to appear. And if we just build more highways, then people would be able to get around faster, right? How well has that worked out for us? I mean, you know, Kansas City and St. Louis, they feel like they can be bad, but have you ever driven in Dallas or Houston? Roger can tell you what Houston was like back in the day, and it's only gotten worse since then. And Lord help you if you ever have to drive in Los Angeles. I don't ever want to drive. Margaret's over there going, yeah. I don't ever want to drive in LA. We built all these roads thinking we're going to make people get around faster. And what did we do? We just expanded. We just had more cars that were going to go on the roads. And so now you get stuck in traffic for just that little bit longer. Precisely because we had the space for it, right? Paradoxically, one of the ways that we can actually fix traffic congestion is you reduce the number of roads that people have. Oddly enough, that seems to work. That doesn't make any sort of logical sense for us, but that is the way that it works. And it comes back to this old truism that we have that says, nature abhors a vacuum. Because whatever empty space we have, whatever is there will expand to fit the space. Traffic does that. The things we try to deal with in life, they will do that. There is even a story that Jesus is a part of in Luke's Gospel in chapter 11. And he tells of removing an unclean spirit from someone. And then, because that space was now nice and clean, the unclean spirit was gone, and everything was put back in order, and life was all good for them. All that happened was they managed just to put up this great big sign that said vacancy on there, and that unclean spirit returned with some of his friends. Why? There was nothing there. It was empty. It was ready for something to move in. Processing big things that happen is not just about cleaning the space up, putting everything back where it belongs, but it is also about deliberately deciding what is going to go back into that space. How we process those big things tells us what is going to go back into that place. The story of the walk to Emmaus is a story that tells us of filling that space back up very well. Remember how we got there. There were these two men. We're only told the name of one of them, but their names aren't even really that important. They were believers, they were disciples. They weren't like the disciples, but they were disciples. They had followed Jesus for a while. They very much believed in him, but their world had been shattered. And on a Sunday morning, the first day of the week, they had maybe a faint glint of hope that maybe something had changed. They'd heard a very dark rumor. And I say it's a dark rumor not because it doesn't have hope, but because if it's true, that's wonderful. But if it's not, it breaks you just a little bit more than you thought you could be broken. And so they were hesitant to believe. So they were going, what we presume was back to their home to start the week off, to begin to work. Along the way on their journey, they're joined by another man who gives all the appearances of not having a single clue what has happened. And in that, he joined the majority of people that were in Jerusalem at the time. Most people didn't know about all of the events that had happened on that Friday, nor did most of them probably care. And yet, for these two guys, their world was broken. And so they're incredulous then when this man who is walking down the road with them doesn't seem to understand the sheer heartache and the heartbrokenness that they are dealing with. And this isn't one of these times where they can just walk a little bit faster to get away from this guy that they don't want to be with. You know what, maybe it's just me that does this. I'm in Walmart and I already said hi to someone that I maybe didn't want to say hi to begin with, so I just walk a little bit faster to get away and duck down the next aisle. Then if I see them later on, I just keep my head down looking at my grocery list, hoping to remember that I have my phone turned the right direction so I'm not reading upside down. I mean, maybe that's just me that does that. But these guys had miles and miles left to go. There was no walking faster to get out of this one. So here's where they begin to engage in a good way of processing things. They began to tell this guy their story, telling him what it is that had happened, why it had hurt them so much. And they were telling their story to someone who was willing to listen to it. And listen in what we're given to be as a very compassionate sort of way. And it is very true that telling someone helps us begin the process of working through whatever it is that has happened. Now, They didn't know who they were telling all of this to. And that becomes the next important part for them in processing what had happened. Because then Jesus responds. Now, they don't know who this is. And this is where things get tricky, because they are deliberately being kept in the dark about who Jesus is. And that actually is a good thing. We hear the story and we begin to think, well, why doesn't Jesus just tell them who it is? Tell them who he is. And that wouldn't actually do them any good, because then they would be excited, they'd be overjoyed, they would be like unable to control themselves, and they never would have worked through what had happened. And so Jesus doesn't tell them, they don't recognize him, and they begin to talk. Now, this is not the first time that we see this happen either. We go back to Paul's Damascus Road experience that he will reference back to numerous times, where he is stopped on the road to Damascus by this bright light, and Jesus is talking to him and says, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And then his eyes are covered in scales for a few days. And all of that is not as punishment for Paul. All of that is making sure that Paul is not letting other things get in his way of dealing with this life-altering event that has happened in his life. We see this also happen at another time when, back when Elizabeth tells Zechariah that she is going to have a baby. You know, this is John the Baptist, and he is not so sure about this, because he knows how old they are and how unlikely this is. And then the angel says, "Why? You don't think this is going to happen? You're not going to be able to talk for the rest of her pregnancy." That wasn't punishment. That was giving space for him to work it out. So that when he begins to speak again is after he confirms that, yes, his name is going to be John, showing that he had processed all the things that had happened and he was ready. Here, these two men don't know that it's Jesus they're talking to, but that actually lets them work through their struggles. That lets them work through what has happened without having to put on a show. They get to be themselves in the moment. They get to tell their story. They get to learn, and they get to listen. And what Jesus is doing here is that he is not telling them anything that they don't already know. He begins retelling them maybe things they have heard 100 times before already, but now they're going to hear them differently. And that's the thing to remember about this, is that in the moment, they don't know who he is, but they're beginning to sense that this is someone that they can trust and that they can listen to. And he is doing a great job of reminding them of who Jesus is, and he is setting them at ease, even if they don't know who they're talking to. And eventually they do figure this out. But it's not until the very end of their journey, they're sitting in their home and they're breaking bread together, and they figure it out, but their response is not one of anger, their response is not one of incredulity, their response is not one that says, "Why didn't you tell us before?" But they remember. And they say, "Remember when he was talking to us, we were comforted. When he was talking to us, we were strengthened." They were feeling fulfilled, and they were able to accept what had happened, so that they can be his disciples, so that they can be who they're supposed to be. Think about what Jesus is doing. This is something we see Jesus do all the time. There's a great quote by Michelangelo that always comes back to me in this kind of story. And he was asked the question, well, how do you create such great sculptures? And the reply that he is said to have given is this one. He says, "The idea is there locked inside. All you have to do is remove the excess stone." Now, I could try and do that, and I'm never going to come up with anything nearly as beautiful as what he can do. But he sees things differently. Jesus stays quiet about who he is so that he can do this very thing. So that he can help remove the excess that has built up around them. So that he can help them find themselves in the midst of what they should have known all the time, that all this other stuff had blocked their way, had blocked their ability, and had built up, and it just needed to be chipped away. And now they understand. and they are prepared to be able to get on with their life and with their calling that Jesus has placed on them to be his disciples. What was hidden from them had been uncovered, not because Jesus was hiding it, but now they understood the truth of who Jesus is. And in doing this, he's helping them to make that space, and not just make the space, but to fill it in the right way. In the earlier example of Luke 11, of the unclean spirit that had been cast out but then returns, Jesus is taking these two guys and helping them avoid that mistake. Not only is everything being set right and cleaned and put into place and that space being made, but it is also being filled with the right things, the good things, the hope that they can have for the future that is ahead of them. More accurately, Jesus is chipping away at the stone around them and around us so that we can all see what is underneath. So when you find yourself in a place needing to process something big and life-changing, or even something small but significant, the goal when we say to focus on Jesus isn't to say his name a bunch of times, hoping that he will magically solve our problem. But the goal is to give Jesus space so that he can show us what we can't yet see. When we talk about sharing the good news, it's not about making sure everyone knows Jesus' name and who he is, but it's about showing everyone what Jesus does. When we go out into the world, this is what we are seeking to do. And so how can we as a church, as individuals, as families, help others uncover who God has made them to be? We don't do that by telling everyone exactly what to do, but we do that by sharing the journey with them, much like Jesus did on that road to Emmaus with these two guys who just needed someone to walk with for a while and to listen. And then when the time comes, then to tell them about who Jesus is. Jesus isn't there to force someone into something new, but he is there to uncover that part of them and us that we never knew existed. God knows this about us, and that's why he sent his son to come into the world, that there was still part of us we didn't yet know and we didn't understand, and it was only going to happen because he was here. Focusing on Jesus in the middle of a problem or crisis or struggle doesn't make things magically appear, but it takes us on a journey that can feel magical as he leads us to what we need to know. And in the process of that, he gives us a new image of ourselves that shows us overcoming even our hardest moments. We are a part of that story. We are one of the tools that Jesus has, that he sends out to do this with others, to be on that journey with others. Jesus uses us to help others see that image of themselves that is covered up. And so let us go out into the world to live this life in the way that Jesus calls us, so that we may see fully that image that he is creating. Let us go and be the people that Jesus wants us to be, and know that we can do that, not by having everything right, but being on that journey. Let's do this in Christ's name. Amen.